It's the iconic face of the Akron area and the city's third largest employer. It is one of the companies that earned Akron the nickname the rubber capital of the world. Tonight, Goodyear is under attack from President Trump. Good evening to you. I'm Laura Casho.
And I'm Russ Mitchell. The President of the United States today went on Twitter to tell the world to boycott Goodyear because employees were allegedly told they could not wear MAGA hats. There is a lot to unpack here. The president did this in a swing state and an election year. Mark Naymik now with details and reaction.
What tough trade policies and smart tariffs can bring to jobs and
President Trump in Ohio just 2 weeks ago, talking up policies for workers and pushing a message to buy American. Today, an angry tweet calling for a boycott of the iconic company that supplies tires for the presidential limousine. Don't buy Goodyear tires. They announced a ban on MAGA hats. Get better tires for far less. His tweet reads in part, the president reacting to a story about a slideshow on diversity shown to employees at a Topeka, Kansas Goodyear facility. The slideshow listed as an example of unacceptable political material the slogan Blue Lives Matter and Make America Great Again attire, while not identifying material specifically affiliated with Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. Among appropriate slogans listed, Black Lives Matter. Goodyear said in a statement that the slideshow was not part of diversity training nor distributed by its corporate headquarters, but it didn't explain its origins or purpose. The company, though, standing by its ban on political messaging. We ask that associates refrain from workplace expressions in support of political campaigning for any candidate or political party, as well as similar forms of advocacy that fall outside the scope of racial justice and equity issues. Goodyear said it strongly supports law enforcement. Democrats from Ohio sounded off on the tweet. U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown calling the president's message despicable. Akron Mayor Dan Horgan tweeting, "Now you're coming to destroy the American economy and heartland jobs. Luckily, you seem to fail at everything you do." Trump's Ohio campaign referring questions to the White House.
Goodyear needs to come out and clarify their policy. There was an image. They failed to clear. Yes, I did see their statements, which still failed to clarify their policy.
Both political parties chase the American worker during every campaign season every 4 years. Ohio's no different. You've seen them come to factories, as the president did recently. So Democrats see this as a political gift this close to the election, surely to talk about it soon. Also, the White House today showing that it recognizes that by deflecting a little bit and putting this back on the company. So did Rob Portman, a Republican senator who supports the president, saying they have a right to choose what their employees wear, but said they should do so fairly and objectively. So we're going to hear a lot more about this soon, Russ.
We certainly will. All right, Mark Naymik in Akron. Thank you.